Two men left the bar after a long night of drinking, jumped in the car and started it up. After a couple of minutes, an old man appeared in the passenger window and tapped lightly. The passenger screamed, "Look at the window!" There's an old man ghost's face there. The driver sped up, but the old man's face stayed in the window. The passenger rolled his window down part way and, scared out of his wits, said, "What do you want?" The old man softly replied, "You got any tobacco?" The passenger handed the old man a cigarette and yelled, "Step on it," to the driver, rolling up the window in terror. A few minutes later, they calmed down and started laughing again. The driver said, "I don't know what happened, but don't worry. We're doing 80 now." All of a sudden, there was a light tapping on the window, and the old man reappeared. "There he is again," the passenger yelled. He rolled down the window and shakily said, "Yes?" "Do you have a light?" the old man quietly asked. The passenger threw a lighter out the window, saying, "Step on it." They were flooring it and going about 100 miles an hour, trying to forget what they had just seen and heard, when all of a sudden there came some more tapping. "Oh my God, he's back." The passenger rolled down the window and screamed in stark terror, "What now?" The old man gently replied, "You want some help getting out of the mud?" An old fisherman is walking on a beach carrying a few fish in a bucket. A game warden walks up and asks to see his fishing license. "I don't have a fishing license," says the man. "You know it's illegal to fish without a license, right?" asks the warden. "I wasn't fishing, officer. These fish are my pets." "Your pets?" "Yes, officer. They like a little exercise, so when the weather's fine, I take them to the water and let them swim around. Once they're done, I give them a whistle and they jump back into my bucket and we head home." The officer isn't buying a word of it, so the old man says, "Don't believe me? Just watch." And he throws the fish into the sea. The warden waits for a minute, then says, "All right, now whistle to your fish and make them jump out of the water." The fisherman turns to the officer and says, "What fish?" A man walked out to the street and caught a taxi just going by. He got into the taxi and the cabbie said, "Perfect timing. You're just like Brian." Passenger: "Who?" Cabbie: "Brian Sullivan. He's a guy who did everything right all the time. Like my coming along when you needed a cab, things happen like that to Brian Sullivan every single time." Passenger: "There are always a few clouds over everybody." Cabbie: "Not Brian Sullivan. He was a terrific athlete. He could have won the Grand Slam at tennis. He could golf with the pros. He sang like an opera baritone and danced like a Broadway star, and you should have heard him play the piano. He was an amazing guy." Passenger: "Sounds like he was something really special." Cabbie: "There's more. He had a memory like a computer. He remembered everybody's birthday. He knew all about wine, which foods to order, and which fork to eat them with. He could fix anything, not like me. I change a fuse, and the whole street blacks out. But Brian Sullivan, he could do everything right." Passenger: "Wow. Some guy then." Cabbie: "He always knew the quickest way to go in traffic and avoid traffic jams. Not like me, I always seem to get stuck in them. But Brian, he never made a mistake, and he really knew how to treat a woman and make her feel good. He would never answer her back even if she was in the wrong, and his clothing was always immaculate, shoes highly polished too. He was the perfect man. He never made a mistake. No one could ever measure up to Brian Sullivan." Passenger: "An amazing fellow. How did you meet him?" Cabbie: "Well, I never actually met Brian. He died. I'm married to his widow." Outside an Irish pub, an old man was fishing in a big rain puddle with a stick and string. A passerby felt sorry for him and invited him in for a whiskey. Trying to make conversation, the man asked, "So, how many have you caught today?" The old man smiled and said, "You're number 8. A small, balding man storms into a local bar and demands, Give me a double of the strongest whiskey you got. I'm so mad I can't even see straight. The bartender, noticing that the little man is a bit worse for the wear, pours him a double of Southern Comfort. The man swills down the drink and says, "Give me another one." The bartender pours the drink but says, "Now, before I give you this, why don't you let off a little steam and tell me why you're so upset?" The man begins his tale. "Well, I was sitting in the bar next door when this gorgeous blonde slinks in and actually sits beside me. I thought, wow, this has never happened before. You know, it was kind of a fantasy come true. Well, a couple of minutes later, I feel this hand moving around in my lap, and the blonde leans over, licks my ear, and asks if I'm interested. I couldn't believe this was happening. I managed to nod my head yes, so she grabs my hand and starts walking out of the bar. So, of course, I went with her. This was just too good to be true." He continues, "She took me down the street to a nice hotel and up to her room. As soon as she shut the door, she slipped out of her dress. That was all she was wearing. I tell you, it didn't take me much longer to get out of my clothes, but as soon as I jumped into the bed, I heard some keys jingling and someone starts fumbling with the door." The blonde says, "Oh my God, it's my boyfriend." "He must have lost his wrestling match tonight. He's gonna be real mad. Quick, hide." I opened the closet, but I figured that was probably the first place he would look, so I didn't hide there. Then I looked under the bed, but I figured that he's bound to look there too. By now I could hear the key in the lock. I noticed the window was open, so I climbed out and was hanging there by my fingers, praying that the guy wouldn't see me. The bartender says, "Well, I can see how you might be a bit frustrated at this point." Well, yeah, but I hear the guy finally get the door open, and he yells, "Who you been sleeping with now, witch?" The girl says, "Nobody, honey. Now come to bed and calm down." Well, the guy starts tearing up the room. I hear him tear the door off the closet and throw it across the room. I'm thinking, boy, I'm glad I didn't hide in there. Then I hear him lift up the bed and throw it across the room. Good thing I didn't hide under there either. Then I heard him say, "What's that over there by the window?" I think, oh God, I'm dead meat now. But by now, the blonde is trying real hard to distract him and convince him to stop looking. Well, I hear the guy go into the bathroom, and I hear water running for a long time. I figure maybe he's going to take a bath or something, when all of a sudden, the jerk pours a pitcher of scalding hot water out of the window right on top of my head. I mean, look at this. I got second-degree burns all over my scalp and shoulders. The bartender says, "Oh man, that would have pissed me off for sure." No, that didn't really bother me. Next, the guy starts slamming the window shut over and over on my hands. I mean, look at my fingers. They're a bloody mess. I can hardly hold this glass. The bartender looks at the guy's hands and says, "Yeah, buddy, I can understand why you're so upset." No, that wasn't what really pissed me off. The bartender then asks in exasperation, "Well, then what did finally piss you off?" "Well, I was hanging there and I turned around and looked down and I was only about 6 inches off the ground." Two unemployed guys are talking. One says, "I'm going to become a lion tamer." The other replies, "That's crazy. You don't know nothing about no lion taming." "I can figure it out." "Well, okay, answer me this. When one of those lions comes at you all roaring and biting, what you gonna do?" "Well, then I take that big chair they all carry and I stick it in his face until he backs down." "Well, what if the lion takes that big paw and hooks the chair with them big claws and throws that chair out of the cage? What do you do then?" "Well, then I takes that whip they all carry, and I whip him until he backs down." "Well, what if that lion bites that whip with his big teeth and bites it in two? What you gonna do then?" "Well, then I take that gun they all carry and I shoot him." "Well, what if that gun doesn't work? What will you do then?" "Well, then I pick up some of the shit that's on the bottom of the cage and I throw it in his eyes and I run out of the cage." "Well, what if there ain't no shit on the bottom of the cage? What you gonna do then?" "Well, that's dumb. If that lion comes at me and he throws the chair out of the cage, and he bites the whip in two, and my gun doesn't work. There's going to be some shit on the bottom of that cage. You can bet your ass on that. An elderly lady was patiently waiting for a parking spot in a crowded lot, her turn signal on, when a young man in a flashy red Mercedes suddenly sped past her and slid into the spot she had been waiting for. Fuming, she got out of her car and walked up to him. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "I was waiting for that spot." The young man, oozing arrogance, flashed a smug grin and said, "Well, that's how it works when you're young and quick." His dismissive tone only fueled her irritation. Without a word, she turned and marched back to her car. Moments later, with deliberate precision, she reversed, then drove straight into the side of his shiny Mercedes, leaving a massive dent. The young man ran over, panic etched on his face. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. "Why would you do that?" The elderly lady stepped out of her car with a calm, satisfied smile. She looked him in the eye and said, "That's what you can do when you're old and wealthy." A woman visited a doctor's office for an examination. A few minutes into the checkup, loud screeching erupted from the room, followed by the woman bolting out as if fleeing for her life. It took considerable effort, but a nurse eventually managed to calm her down enough to get the story. The nurse stormed into the doctor's office, furious, and yelled, "Doctor, how could you? Mrs. Smith is 82 years old, and you told her she's pregnant." Without looking up from his notes, the doctor replied calmly, "Does she still have the hiccups?" Many years ago, a fisherman and his wife had twin sons, but they didn't know what to name them. The husband said, "Let's just wait. If we wait long enough, the names will simply occur to us." After several weeks, they noticed something peculiar about the children. When left alone, one boy would face the sea, and the other would face inland. "Let's call the boys Toward and Away," suggested the fisherman, and his wife agreed. Years passed, and one day the fisherman told his adult sons, "It's time that you learned how to make a living from the sea." The fisherman and his sons provisioned their ship and set sail for a 3-month voyage. At the voyage's end, the fisherman returned alone. "What happened?" his wife cried. "We were barely 1 day out to sea," the fisherman explained solemnly, "when Tord hooked a great fish. Tord fought long and hard, but the fish was great and strong. For an entire week they wrestled upon the waves, yet eventually the great fish started to win the battle, and Tord was pulled over the side. He was swallowed whole, and we never saw either of them again." "Oh dear," the wife cried. "What a huge fish that must have been! What a terrible fish! What a horrible fish!" "Yes, it was, but you should have seen the one that got away." A blonde had just totaled her car in a horrific road accident. But miraculously, she managed to pry herself from the wreckage without a scratch and was applying fresh lipstick when a policeman arrived. "My God!" the policeman gasped. "Your car looks like an accordion that was jumped on by an elephant." "Are you okay, ma'am?" "Yes, officer, I'm just fine," the blonde chirped. "Well, how in the world did this happen?" the officer asked as he surveyed the wrecked car. "Officer, it was the strangest thing," the blonde began. "I was driving along this road when from out of nowhere this tree pops up in front of me. So I swerved to the right and there was another tree. I swerved to the left and there was another tree. I swerved to the right and there was another tree. I swerved to the left and there was." Ma'am," the officer said, cutting her off, "there isn't a tree on this road for about 30 miles. That was your air freshener swinging back and forth." A man goes to the doctor worried about his wife's temper. The doctor asks, "What's the problem?" The man says, "Doctor, I don't know what to do. Every day my wife seems to lose her temper for no reason. It scares me." The doctor says, "I have a cure for that. When it seems that your wife is getting angry, just take a glass of water and start swishing it in your mouth. Just swish and swish, but don't swallow it until she either leaves the room or calms down." 2 weeks later, the man comes back to the doctor looking fresh and reborn. The man says, "Doctor, that was a brilliant idea." Every time my wife started losing it, I swished with water. I swished, and she calmed right down. How does a glass of water do that? The doctor says, "The water itself does nothing. It's keeping your mouth shut that does the trick." An old man and an old woman are sitting side by side in their rocking chairs. The old woman is quietly embroidering, and the old man is engrossed in his newspaper. After a moment, she looks at him with a wistful smile and says, "Honey, you don't sit close to me like you used to." Hearing this, the old man sets down his paper and scoots his chair closer to hers. She then adds, "And honey, you don't put your arm around me anymore." Without hesitation, he gently wraps his arm around her. A playful glint appears in her eyes as she says, "Honey, you don't nibble on my ear anymore." Suddenly, the old man gets up and starts walking away. Surprised, she calls out, "Honey, where are you going?" He turns back with a grin and says, "Just going to get my teeth." The ghost of a dead cat carrying its severed tail in its mouth walks into a bar at 3 a.m. Only the bartender is there, cleaning up and shutting the place down for the night. The cat puts down the tails and begins to speak. "Pardon me, sir. I don't know if you remember me, but I'm the cat that was struck and killed by a car right in front of your bar exactly a year ago tonight. I've come to ask your help," the ghost cat says. "Since the accident severed my tail, I've been doomed to walk the earth carrying my tail in my mouth until I can find a human that will reattach it for me. Could you please do me that favor?" The owner looks at his watch and then at the ghost cat. "I wish I could, little ghost cat," the bartender says, "but our license strictly forbids me from retailing spirits after 2 a.m. A large woman wearing a sleeveless sundress walked into a bar in London. She raised her right arm, revealing a huge, hairy armpit as she pointed to all the people sitting at the bar and asked, "What man here will buy a lady a drink?" The bar went silent as the patrons tried to ignore her. But down at the end of the bar, an owly-eyed drunk slammed his hand down on the counter and bellowed, "Give the ballerina a drink!" The bartender poured the drink and the woman chugged it down in one. She turned to the patrons and again pointed around at all of them, revealing the same hairy armpit, and asked, "What man here will buy a lady a drink?" Once again, the same little drunk slapped his money down on the bar and boomed, "Give the ballerina another drink." The bartender approached the little drunk and said, "I say, old chap, it's your business if you want to buy the lady a drink, but why do you keep calling her the ballerina?" "As far as I'm concerned," the drunk replied, "any woman who can lift her leg that high has got to be a ballerina." A doctor who claimed to have a repertoire of funny jokes and miraculous cures for arthritis had a waiting room full of people, eagerly anticipating their turn for some laughter and other relief. Among them was a little old lady, completely bent over, shuffling in slowly and relying on her trusty old cane. After patiently waiting, her turn had finally arrived, and she gingerly entered the doctor's office. To everyone's amazement, within just half an hour, the little old lady came out from the office, no longer bent over but walking completely erect and straight with her head held high. Her transformation was nothing short of miracle. Overflowing with enthusiasm, her daughter, who had accompanied her to her appointment at the doctor's office, couldn't help but smile. With excitement, she said, "Mom, you went from walking bent over to now standing tall." Whatever that doctor did was nothing short of a miracle. With a mischievous twinkle in her eye, the mother responded, "Miracle, schmiracle. You won't believe it, dear. He simply gave me a longer cane." Surprisingly, a simple switch of props was all that was needed. A husband and wife decided they needed to use code to indicate that they wanted to have sex without letting their children in on it. They decided on the word typewriter. One day the husband told his 5-year-old daughter, Go tell your mommy that Daddy needs to type a letter. The child told her mother what her dad said, and her mom responded, Tell your daddy that he can't type a letter right now 'cause there is a red ribbon in the typewriter. The child went back to tell her father what Mommy said. A few days later, the mom told the daughter, Tell Daddy that he can type that letter now. The child told her father, returned to her mother, and announced, Daddy said never mind with the typewriter, he already wrote the letter by hand. A burglar entered a bedroom, tied up the husband and wife, kissed the wife's ear, and went to the bathroom. The husband said to the wife, Satisfy him, or he will kill us, be strong. I love you, wife said. He didn't kiss me. He whispered in my ear that he is gay, he needs Vaseline, and I told him it's in the bathroom. So be strong. I love you too. He said, I don't know why you wear a bra. You've got nothing to put in it. She said, You wear pants, don't you? He said, Shall we try swapping positions tonight? She said, That's a good idea. You stand by the ironing board while I sit on the sofa and fart. He said, What have you been doing with all the grocery money I gave you? She said, Turn sideways and look in the mirror, he said. Why are married women heavier than single women? She said. Single women come home, see what's in the fridge and go to bed. Married women come home, see what's in bed, and go to the fridge. A woman from New York was driving through a remote part of Arizona when her car broke down. An American Indian on horseback came along and offered her a ride to a nearby town. She climbed up behind him on the horse and they rode off. The ride was uneventful, except that every few minutes the Indian would let out a yeehaw, so loud that it echoed from the surrounding hills and canyon walls. When they arrived in town, he let her off at the local service station, yelled one final yeehaw, and rode off. What did you do to get that Indian so excited? Asked the service station attendant. Nothing, the woman answered. I merely sat behind him on the horse, put my arms around his waist, and held on to the saddle horn so I wouldn't fall off. Lady, the attendant said, Indians don't use saddles.